Hello and welcome to another episode of the Altered States podcast. This week we're sitting down with a good friend, Bouaziz. Mo is an incredible human with a deep understanding of holistic health, nutrition and ancestral wisdom. In this episode we dive into concepts like how to find identity, developing emotion and intelligence, having the courage to make sacrifices, how to navigate stress in the modern world and much more. This episode is absolutely packed with golden information that I'm sure you're going to love. Also, I don't doubt that some of you will be interested in working with Mo after hearing him speak. If you do want to get in touch with Mo and find out how he could help you with your personal development, I'll link his details in the show notes below. We ended up getting a bit carried away with this podcast and it ran for over 3 hours. It actually went on so long, our video cut out, so we decided to split it into 2 parts. We did our best to stop part 1 at a point where the conversation began to change, but there was definitely no perfect point we could find to finish, so you'll notice it kind of ends a bit abruptly. Also, although this was actually the second podcast we recorded, we didn't release it straight away because we weren't 100% on if we should break it up or not. Last thing before we get into it, I've set up a discount code for you guys from my website, apenutrition.co.uk. We sell a bunch of different health foods and supplements, including beef organ capsules, CBD and low-carb protein bars. The code is AS10 and it's in the show notes below with a link to my website. Right, let's get going. Hello and welcome to episode 2 of the Altered States podcast with myself, Josh Gape, Harry Williams, and we've got our first guest on, Bouaziz. So I've known Mo for, how long now? About a year and a half? Maybe a bit more? Couple years?
Yeah, maybe that.
And we met, it's quite an interesting story actually. So I was doing something random and quite kind of weird. I was doing what's it called? Ninja Warrior. You know Ninja Warrior on TV.
Ninja Warrior, yeah.
So Tim had a setup where we went to... So Ninja Warrior, believe it or not, is actual sport. Like, people do that for a living. If you're like high-level Ninja Warrior, you can travel the world and do competitions in like Germany, USA, stuff like that. I think the prize money for the competition in Germany is like 250 grand. Wow. So you can earn a good living if you're like top-level Ninja Warrior. So there's a facility up north of England somewhere. I forget the name of it, but I'll put it in the show notes for anyone that's interested. It's a real cool facility. You go up and they've got all the stuff like they got on the TV show. So we went there, we did the course, it was a real good laugh. And then to finish, you do the wall. The ramp, you know, the wall, right?
The wall, yeah.
So they do a little demo on the wall first, because like when you run up the wall, if you don't make it, you can't like slide down. You've got to kind of like run down backwards. However more difficult that sounds, but that's like the protocol.
It's like a half pipe, innit?
It's like a very steep half pipe. Yeah, it's like something you'd see Tony Hawk going down.
Man.
So do the first little demo up and down, do the second one, and the second time I actually made it to the top. I wasn't expecting to make it to the top at all, so I just didn't think about holding on. Like I didn't, I never thought I was going to make it, so I was like, didn't compute in my head like, oh, I'll grab hold when I get to the top. So I just like ran up, like touched the top, and like ran back down, and they're like, why didn't you jump up? Like that's the whole point. I was like, fuck, I completely like didn't even think. So third time, here I go, and literally first step off the bottom of the ladder, I'm wearing Vivo barefoot trainers, and my calf just popped.
That's not a good promo for Vivo barefoot, by the way.
Yeah, no, I rate Vivo barefoots, but maybe like when you're like wearing them in, it's not a good idea.
I've never worn Vivo barefoots. Do you have to wear them in?
I think it's just because it's like the equivalent of like bare shoe, barefoot walking or barefoot running, whatever. It like your foot takes time to adapt to the trainer.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people just buy them and then start going running on trails or being idiots and running up ramps with them, and like you're just not adapted to how you're used to the padding. So anyway,
just one quick question on the Vivo barefoots. Is the bottom made out of rubber?
Yeah.
I don't like. How are they different from those shoes you buy at Primark, though, the little winkle pickers with the 3 lace holes? You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
You probably wore them to like Tiger when you were 15.
Well, yeah. I didn't, but yeah, it's a different conversation. They don't, mate. I think they're pretty similar, to be honest. They've taken that concept and they've like
the concept of Primark Winkle pickers. They're really wrong with it.
Yeah.
No,
exactly.
sorry.
They really
You got
wrong
well
with it.
sidetracked there. Sorry.
So yeah, anyway, pop my calf, drive back in agony, get home, and I'm just like in so much pain, and I was actually on crutches the day. I couldn't get out of bed, on crutches the day after, and I've like gone to A&E, gone in, and the doctor see me, and he was like, you're gonna be on crutches like 6 to 8 weeks. You got a hematoma in your calf. And you couldn't. It was funny because you couldn't even see any bruising. Like to the naked eye, it didn't even look bad. But he said it was like so deep in there. So anyway, Tim Sheaf, who we all know, took me to the thing, and he was like, "Oh, my friends, Mo and Riz, you should see them because they'll be able to treat you." So the following day, wasn't it? You and Riz came over the house and treated me with blood cupping.
Yeah.
And I literally went from being told it was going to be 6 to 8 weeks until I could like walk without the crutches to being able to walk the following day after the treatment, and within 6 days I was back in the gym squatting. So it was like a miraculous recovery, and I'm sure you can go into it more, but like the whole concept was like when your body feels that injury, your body rushes blood to the site of the injury to try and fix it. But what happens is, and the analogy you gave was is like every fire truck on the planet driving down, the M5 trying to get to here to take out the fire in the house, to put out the fire in the house, and they cram the motorway and they can't get there anymore. And that's effectively what the blood does. So when you do the blood cupping, draws blood out of the leg, gives, basically frees up those roads to allow the healing to get in there. Am I doing a fair description of what
This
goes
is
on?
a great introduction, man. Great introduction. I love this. Yeah. But no, it's pretty much. That's how we met.
Yeah, so that's how we met. Yeah,
We had I remember that conversation. It was a dope conversation. It was the first time we'd actually met in person, and I could definitely feel a spark and a deep connection with you, immediately.
Yeah.
And I believe, the Most High, allowed for that to manifest and that injury to happen so we would connect.
Yeah, for sure, man.
So that's how we met.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things I do and I work with is hijama, or blood cupping, bloodletting cupping. And that was nearly a couple of years ago now.
Yeah,
Since then, we've been out. We've done a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Connected and stuff. Yeah,
got to know each other really well, and that was kind of one of the reasons I wanted to bring you on, because like getting to know you over the last couple of years, you've had such an interest in life to lead you up to where you are now and what you're doing.
Yeah.
And I definitely want to talk about your practice and the sort of holistic health principles you employ, but I think it'd be cool to like rewind and tell the story of kind of where you've got to where how you've got to where you've got.
Yeah. I mean, to try and condense that down into a few minutes is very tough, but
we've got hours, mate. We can go forever.
We have unlimited time, mate, so you just take as long as you need, mate.
Something's comfy. So yeah, my name is Mohammed Bouaziz. I don't like to be defined by what I do.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a human being, and I've had a lot of experience through this life, through this journey, that has brought me ample amount of experience and insight working with helping other human beings kind of optimize their journey and their potential.
Where do you think for you where do you think it started, like, because working with you in that experience and then also since then, it's clear like some people you stumble across, and Harry, you'll know this from like playing sport and stuff, sometimes you'll meet a physio or a specific doctor and they've just got that innate ability to heal people. I think there's something more than their degree or whatever. They've just got healer, in their blood. That's their archetype. And meeting you, you definitely exude that. And I think like when was the first time in your life that you thought, okay, this is the sort of thing I want to do?
Great question. I've always been fascinated with medicine.
Yeah.
And emigrating from North Africa when I was 6, leaving my country, to pursue. You know, my dad left the country amidst the civil war. I was very good in school at the time, and there was a lot of injustice that had happened in that year where, you know, I should have been awarded something, and there was a lot of things that happened that led to my dad deciding to leave the country and starting a completely new life for us abroad. But
that's the UK, right?
I mean, before that we came. The UK was the last place we ended up, but before that we'd actually immigrated, because you can't just go and get a visa. You know, where at that time, during the civil war of Algeria and the political state at the time, bombs going off and people's heads being cut off and stuff. You can't just go to the embassy and say, I want to go to England.
Yeah.
There you go. So my dad had to basically, he left his business, he left his house, he left his family, and then an opportunity came overnight. A visa came, and we ended up in Italy. Okay, so cool. Initially we landed in Rome, and then from Rome we transitioned to Holland. From Holland we came to Paris, and then from Paris we ended up in England about 6 months after.
Okay.
So I'd actually lived in Holland for a little bit. I'd lived in Paris for, I thought it was a year up until recently, where I was retracing that back with my family, and it was about 6 months where we lived in Paris. And I actually went to school there, had friends. And then we came to England. I won't bore you with the ins and outs of how that happened, but put it this way, it was, we're very lucky to be here. My dad has sacrificed a lot to bring me here. So I always felt that I owed him my life, especially the narrative of being, I'm doing this for you guys, for your future, so you can study, you can, become successful. And our definition of success was an education, growing up to be something worthy of praise. So my childhood, really, I was immersed in playing football. I was always a competitive person. I channeled that into sports, and in school and out of school I played football from a very young age, captained the school teams. I was always like a winner, wanted to be a winner, had something to prove. I learned English within 3 months. I'd already became fluent at French, coming from speaking 2 languages already at 6. And then we came to England. We stayed in London for a little bit. Then we got moved to Rotherham in Sheffield by the social services.
Fucking hell.
As right?
How long were you there for?
We were in Rotherham for nearly 2 years.
All right,
and you can imagine a Muslim family. My mum obviously wore a headscarf, being sent into a very white kind of dominant area. And then a few months into that, 9/11 happened. So you can imagine the whole world going kind of basically changing forever. And I was a Muslim amongst all that, so the environment around me wasn't very receptive to us and our faith. And a lot of things happened to my family. My mum had dogs kind of set on her. My dad was jumped kind of by multiple people when he'd come back home from work at night. I was bullied. We had stuff thrown through the letterbox, windows smashed. We lived in a state of fear. Coming from fight or flight, and is one of my teachers says, shocked people, to further immersed into shocked, being, constantly being afraid in a completely new country, new environment. And then eventually we moved to Bristol, and this was in 2002 because my uncle at the time was living here. And the social services brought us into Bristol, and that's when life got a bit better. So I went to school in Bristol. I went to secondary school in Bristol, did really well at school. Was always pursuing this, wanted to be a doctor. That was my goal, and my sole drive was to be successful, to make my parents happy. I was a really good child at home. I suppressed a lot of stuff. I was a model kid, but growing up, I obviously understood the issues I had going on internally, which I'd suppressed, and I channeled into my studies and into my football. And my life was really waking up, going to school, playing football, repeat. Wanted to be a footballer. That never happened, so I channeled everything into academia, and at 18 I left to go to university to study medicine, or biomedical sciences.
So what was it that made you want to study medicine? Was that something that in your family?
You know what, bro? Like, if you look at kind of the Eastern cultures, right? There's this, when they have their children, you have to look at the Industrial Revolution, what the powers did over the last few hundred years when they've colonized countries and they've created this world and this depiction of a world to the West, the East, sorry, so being a French colony and being industrialized by a French civilization and coming into kind of being raised in the 70s and 80s, my dad had this vision of what success was.
Yeah, okay.
So my grandparents come from the mountains in Algiers, the Atlas Mountains. They are nomads, they are Berbers. They lived high up in the mountain. They ate organic, fresh, local food. It was seasonal. They lived to old age. They walked barefoot, and I got to see some of that when I was in Algeria, and that was preserved in my kind of transition into England. Even though I was in England, the home was Algeria. We maintained that culture. We still spoke the language. We still carried out the traditions. But the traditions, when you've got parents who come from shocked parents, they come from parents that had to deal with the revolution at the time when the French came and colonized and they kicked the French out. So my granddad was in the war, that kind of when the French were in Algeria. So I come from war and fight, and that's in my blood, it's in my genes, it's in my spirit. And so that got carried into my life because we came from shocked people going into immigration, creating a shocked potential. So my whole life was a stress and a trauma. And the only way I knew how to channel that was to try and be successful in life by making my parents happy and becoming a doctor. I never really knew why I wanted to become a doctor, but I was passionate about helping people.
Yeah.
I was passionate about medicine, and I was passionate about serving humanity. And at that age, what I formed in my psychology was to channel it in that direction.
Well, just to make an observation, I could be off the mark here, but you often find that in people who go far in this area of like health, performance, holistic health.
Yeah.
Especially like the alternate therapies. They're people that have come from their own health challenges, and like you've talked a few times about being shocked and like obviously the suppression and
I'll
stuff
get into
like that.
Yeah, for sure.
And a lot of people you'll find will want to heal themselves, and then that gives them the tools to go out and heal other people. And also they have empathy for other people that have come from a shocked or a tough upbringing or whatever, and they'll want to look to help these people. So it does sort of telling your story is, and knowing where you're at now is like you're connecting the dots where you've got this you've had this cultural view of like what holistic health is up in the mountains, where you're like seeing people walking barefoot, eating organic food, eating locally, and then you come in here and that's kind of been mixed with this Western idea of to be successful you should be a doctor or you should be a lawyer or whatever, a
pilot, and that's I come from a disenfranchised background. I had everything against me, especially coming into this country. My dad came into this country with zero. Literally nothing, so coming from that disenfranchised background and having to work up and trying to prove to everybody around me that I was somebody, because I grew up around my dad. I spent a lot of time around my dad, and he was my ultimate trigger and my stress, but at the same time he was a mentor for me because I was always with him. And I observed him and how he was. Subconsciously I would observe my dad and I took on his characteristics. But then when you get to 17, 18, teenage years, you want to do certain things in the West, and your dad's like, no, I can't do that, you can't go here, you can't do that. And so there's this conflict between the new world, the modern West, and then my dad and his values, and the two alphas going head to head. So you get to the point where now I'm challenging my dad. Don't like him, I don't want to be around him because he's limiting me and he's trying to kind of enforce me to live a certain way. So that was really where my kind of more of the shock got perpetuated at teenage years. And I was a clean kid. I never went to parties, I never went out, I never did any drugs, I never went partying. All my friends were out going out, house parties and talking about what they did on a weekend. I just didn't have none of that. I lived like a disciplined lifestyle. So my way out of being surrounded by such limitations of my parents and my family and my culture and my religion, you know, to the extent that I knew, was like, I don't want any of this. I don't want anything to do with this. I want freedom. Because again, there's this concept of freedom that gets thrown around in the mainstream narrative, and everybody around me looked free. I wasn't free. I was, you know, like imprisoned in a certain way. I had to do stuff. I had to meet a certain kind of level of service and work at such a young age, you know. And, you know, I come to this country, I was translating for my parents when they go to the social services. I was put under severe pressure from such a young age. And I always knew I was a leader. I always possessed this will and this fight and this power to not quit, and wanted to prove that to everyone. And I knew it in myself. But everything around me didn't like me. I wasn't accepted. I was rejected by everything around me. The society, the people, the girls, my schoolmates, my parents, you know. So at 18, when I got rejected for medical school, and I worked so hard to get into medical school.
Was that purely on grades?
On grades, yeah. And obviously, again, because of my socioeconomic background and where I came from, and again, because I had this confidence in my ability, I was like, I'm going to apply to Imperial College London. I'm going to apply to UCL. I don't care if I come from this school and this college and this family. I'm going to get in because I deserve to be there because I'm that good. And obviously, on paper, they don't know who the hell I'm. Just a CV and a bunch of grades.
Just numbers.
They don't know my history. They don't know my ability. I always knew I was special, you know, and I don't want to come across arrogant, but I always knew I had something in me.
Yeah.
But everything around me just kept putting me down, kept limiting my freedom. So when I go to uni, I took a biomedical sciences course.
Pull this a bit closer.
I took a biomedical sciences course because I got rejected for all these institutes that I just thought I deserved to be part of, and I took the opportunity to go and study because I wanted to leave home and leave the suppression and the compression of my environment. And it all just comes down to issues with the self, issues with my micro environment, my family, the macro environment, the society. I didn't fit in. I had to be a certain way. I wasn't, I had to, fit a certain image. And the person I was trying to be, and I was being designed to be and molded to be by my family, wasn't fitting in anywhere.
So you were just, at that point, you were just desperate to leave
home.
I was desperate, create your own identity.
Yeah, I was desperate to leave home, and pursue, cool, okay, I can't get into medicine. They say I can transfer after 1 year, no problem. And that time, I was passionate about medicine. I was passionate about becoming a doctor and having a successful career, because that was my definition of success at the time. Fast forward 6 months into university, I get in. I start to have this freedom, right? I get into university with a couple of suitcases full of fresh clobber. You know what I mean? I got my spray, I got my kicks, I'm ready to go. I knew this is it, and I start to uncover and unearth and be more me. Because every time I'm at home and I'm surrounded by my elders, it's like, all right, cool, I've got to be a certain way. Again, suppression. And we understand it now. When you suppress your emotions and your feelings, that directly implicates the suppression of your immune function. And that trauma, day in, day out, moment in, moment out, that constant, perpetual kind of fight or flight stimulation in my body, in my physiology, I got this sense of freedom now. So I went to uni and did what I did, tried to I got into the football team, I was out, I was doing all sorts and exploring who I was, without going into the details. And then 6 months in, I come home for Easter, didn't want to come back home, and 3 a.m. I get severe abdominal pain, right? So the dad goes, "You're all right," type of thing. Luckily, my uncle was visiting us. He's been in England for over 30 years. And he was like, "Listen, kid's got to go, he's in pain," you know what I mean?
Were you doubled over in pain? It was like crippling pain?
Crippling pain, yeah. I woke up middle of the night, crippling pain, went to A&E. They kept me in. I ended up staying for 3 weeks, transferred between a couple of hospitals as they were trying to figure out what the hell was going on. So that was my first thing. And I'd been to work experience in the hospital. I went into I was always fascinated with cardiology and wanted to be a heart surgeon. This almost like I come from nothing and I'm going to be a heart surgeon, so I can prove everybody who I know I am.
Yeah.
And you don't know who I am, but I know who I am. So let me go and do the hardest thing I can. Coming from a disenfranchised background as an immigrant, I'm going to become a heart surgeon, right? The chances of doing that are very slim. So always felt like I had something to prove. And yeah, got into hospital, morphine, appendix out, CT, MRI, consultant this, consultant that, catheter up my private parts. I've been through it all. Still, they couldn't figure out what was wrong with me. They didn't diagnose me with anything. I'm still in pain. Everything they did, I was still in pain. But I had this 3.5 weeks in hospital, in wards, time by myself, dignity taken out of me. I got to witness the conventional allopathic model of medicine firsthand, by not going into experience and being taken around by consultants and physicians, but I was a patient and I got failed. My appendix was completely fine. They took it out anyway. I was still on drugs. Even the drugs couldn't stop the pain. I became a morphine addict. Every time I had pain, morphine. Surrounded by all these old people, and I thought I was going to die. It was more trauma. So eventually they discharged me out of hospital. I went back to uni, to the same old shit and behaviours.
One sec. So were you left the hospital still in pain?
Towards the end of the 3 weeks, the pain had dissipated.
Okay.
Severely. I was still on medication, on multiple medications. I was still not given a diagnosis to what was wrong with me. And I just kind of, at that point, I lost faith.
And to this day, do you know what was
Of course, yeah. I was severely immune compromised.
Okay.
My lymph nodes in and around my gut. I forgot the exact the name of the lymph nodes, but the lymph nodes around my kind of I'm trying to name around my abdomen, right, around my diaphragm, were severely inflamed. And that, understanding the way I was living, the pressures of not sleeping very well, having completely kind of messed up circadian rhythms, poor nutrition, things in my bloodstream that shouldn't have been there, dehydration, pressures of having a double identity, being one person at university, being another person with my family, this constant fight between trying to be somebody. I just was physically fatigued, my immune system just had given up. It was in overdrive.
Yeah.
I was in adrenal overdrive. My lymphatics weren't moving very well. I was severely dehydrated and malnourished. And I just had an immune reaction.
And do you think that was because, so for you growing up, you would have lived like, I've been to your house, the food, your parents put on the table is incredible and that sort of thing. So you would have lived a healthy life for those first 18 years, although obviously all the psychological stress and all that sort of stuff. But do you think that then when you got to university, maybe all that psychological stress you'd experienced, and then when the bad diet, poor sleep and everything was laid on top of that, that's what tipped you over the edge?
I mean, that's the only thing that could happen through observation, but I would say, even though we ate at home and we had home-cooked meals, and we cooked fresh and we never really went out to restaurants, our understanding of nutrition wasn't kind of... my parents weren't nutritionists, right? And the way, living in North Africa, by default, you have a really good diet because everything there is organic, it's local, it's fresh, it comes in on the day. You're cooking, pretty much healthy. Even if you don't know much about nutrition, the environment, the way you eat, the family, you sit down, you give thanks, the connection, eating with your hands, sitting on the floor, high quality produce, all of these things, even though you don't know much about nutrition, you're eating good food, there's a lot of sunshine, there's family. So in general, everything is okay.
Well, it's healthy traditions.
Healthy tradition. And then you come into England, now you're buying food from Asda, right? Everything is processed. You've got access to all of these brands which you couldn't afford in that country, the Kit Kats and the Lions and the Snickers, which you had to have a certain amount of finances to afford when you're living in North Africa. So now we had access to all this refined food, refined sugars, overeating, lack of control with nutrition. I'd fast Ramadan. I started fasting when I was 7, doing full-blown 30-day nil by mouth, fasting.
30-day no food?
No, 30 days, sunrise to sunset, no food, no drink. At a young age, some people kind of at 12, 13, 14, you get encouraged. I just went in, but there was really no discipline with diet. So I think coming into this country and emigrating was the first plummet, where there was a huge decrease in nutritional value of the food that I was eating. There was a huge decrease in the amount of sunshine I was receiving. There was a huge decrease in the family and the social aspect of my life, because I went from being on the street playing football surrounded by elders in a community to nobody, being suppressed in the home with people trying to kill you, or trying to threaten your life. And then having this pressure of trying to go to school and compete at football. I was constantly under stress. So there was a perpetual or an exponential increase in the stresses on my physical body and my spiritual body, because there was no spiritual practices in my life. Even though I was praying and fasting, and outwardly I was a man of faith, inwardly there was no reciprocation of that or internalization of that energy, because it didn't mean much.
It was done without intention.
It was culture. You pray, you fast, you go to the mosque, but there's no internalization of that. And at a young age, it doesn't need to be, but my concepts were all, I had no identity. So when I got to uni, it was like 18 years of life, all that stress condensed down into 6 months of even more stress, malnutrition, eating lots of calories but no nutritional value, lack of sleep, dehydration, like I said, emotional stress, and then my body just gave way as it should at such a young age, because I was on overdrive for so much coffee, right? I've been drinking coffee all my life. Imagine, from the age of 4 or 5, you're drinking coffee twice a day.
Wow.
You know what I mean? So that's what happened. Anyway, cut a long story short, mainstream medicine failed me. I got back into uni and I was like, shit, okay, I'm doing this degree. I'm going to do it anyway. I'm here.
Finish it.
And enjoy myself.
Yeah.
At the time I was working in retail. I had a job. Life was cool. I was having fun. I was into music, and, so I had no reason to go back home and quit uni. But when I graduated, that pursuit of who I really was began, because what uni taught me was, even though I wasn't academically as great as the people getting first class honors and those who were like being geeky at the front of the lecture hall and kind of doing everything to the book academically, I knew I had a lot of potential in life because of who I was in uni, the connections I made, the friendships I'd built, the personality that I unraveled.
Well, there's so much more to it, isn't there? Like, you see people who are, stereotypically book smart, but if they haven't got emotional intelligence, they're, when you work, I've worked in some big corporations, and the people that rise to the top and rise to the top quickest aren't necessarily the people that are the most intelligent on paper. They're the people that are most emotionally intelligent. They're someone that can read the room, someone that can come in and, pick up on the energy that their boss is in a shit mood and maybe not put that paper on their desk that morning.
That's what I genuinely believe I had that at a very young age. And it wasn't like something you could say I was gifted with it, but it was also something, it was a learned behavior, because at such a young age I had to develop emotional intelligence, and make, kind of dad leading the pack and the tribe, leaving one country, coming into multiple different societies and settling. I'm a young kid observing all of this, so my nervous system is developing, my character is developing, and I'm being nurtured by my environment. And my environment is being mentored by this leader of the pack. Doesn't matter who he was and what his characteristics were. He was bold, he was honorable, he took risks, he wasn't afraid, and he walked with a certain demeanor. And I was kind of observing that at a young age. So I developed emotional intelligence from a young age out of survival, because I knew if I stayed quiet and I just observed, it was better than just trying to be like a dysfunctional child.
I think as well, like you say, they say the phrase like pressure creates diamonds, right? So although all that pressure, took its toll and you ended up having those 3 weeks in hospital, at the same time you would have developed some really strong characteristics. And this is what we were talking last week with the whole idea of the Prem final, and the examples who out of adversity and out of struggle, how you can develop as a human being. So although it would have taken its toll on you, at the same time you're developing these skills and you're able to navigate through these these hardships.
For sure. Physically.
Do you feel like, you talk about stress and trauma and you were processing that as you were growing up. Do you feel like that was it was because you'd seen it from such a young age, you were like subconsciously taking in, and that had an effect on you? Or do you think it was some kind of like genetic fingerprint you had literally upon you when you entered the earth?
Yeah, for sure. Great question. I definitely believe in destiny, and I also believe in ancestry. So my ancestors were fighters.
Yeah.
And it's primarily encoded in my DNA and in my genetic fingerprint to be a fighter and a warrior. Whether I knew that at that age, obviously I didn't.
Yeah.
But I definitely came into this world with a lot of kind of primal genetics, you could say, that were passed down, which were kind of epigenetically developed through my grandparents and my father and my great-grands, right? People who had to withstand a certain type of dynamic living in the mountains, and having that hunter-gatherer type of lifestyle at such a close lineage.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It wasn't like hundreds or thousands of years. It was, within 100 years, I had great-grandparents who were living on the mountain and being like hunter-gatherers living in a tribal environment. So, my parents kind of, both of them coming from that tribal setting, there was definitely them being first-generation city people. Their parents weren't,
Yeah.
So for sure I had that coming in, but then my own lifestyle and my childhood also molded it and imprinted that in me deeper physically, and I developed, I'm grateful for all of that. I wouldn't have it any other way, because that molded this spirit, which I would say is partially primal but partially educational and learned, but at the same time, physically it took a toll on me, but then as a spirit, there is no other way you can develop that level of emotional intelligence and spiritual cognition without going through all these stresses and these traumas.
Can't be all love and light. Like, there has to be some sort of trauma, pain, stress.
The pain, like you said, pain is part of life.
Absolutely.
Pain, the only way you can adapt and whether grow new cells or grow new muscle or whatever, is to, there has to be a stimulation, and usually that stimulation is a stress. Now, stress in the animal kingdom is very important, and it has the mechanism of stress, the stress response, is fundamentally a prerequisite to survival. It has to be there.
Yeah.
Stress is beautiful, but sustained stress, chronic stress, where there's inflammation and you don't balance it out and you don't adapt from it, but you keep allowing stress to create harm without you rebuilding the machinery and the chemical structure and the physical structure to be able to adapt from the stress. So now you have a new framework to work on. The stress is just continuously diminishing your life force.
Do you think it's a state that isn't natural for human beings? That we're fundamentally designed to have like this sort of acute stress, like I'm getting chased or I'm going to die, I need to get out of the situation quickly, and then it dissipates and it's gone, and you're back to sitting around a fire making a stew or something, whatever.
Yeah.
But like this constant low level, I've got bills to pay, I've got, my missus is cheating on me, or all this other stuff. It's like it's a very unnatural state, it seems, for human beings to exist in.
During a certain time of history, or through history, however you understand the human narrative, whether you believe in monkeys or whether you believe that humans have always been on this planet, they were put here for a purpose. I believe in the latter. So there was always this tribal, history is repetitive and cyclical. There was always a human community which had stresses and demands and pressures the time they existed.
Yeah.
Whether you talk about the Egyptians 2,000 years ago, or the Arabs 1,500 years ago, or the Greeks however many thousands years ago, or the Vikings or whatever, there's always an environment that the human being has to adapt to. Now, the human being is born perfect and born with his skill set and an innate ability to survive. He's programmed not to survive but to thrive.
Yeah.
Now, when you live in an environment and a society which we live in today, where it's all about survival, then physiologically that diminishes your life force, but spiritually it diminishes your life force, because you're like, why the fuck am I here? Am I just here to survive? Because within me there is a DNA, a physical and a spiritual DNA, which innately allows me to thrive and to celebrate being human, to be beautiful and create art and to have a fascinating experience. But most people are here, they're just about surviving. So, the environment is key to that. And you can't, and maybe we can get into this, but ultimately, I don't believe that we're here to just survive. The hunter-gatherers, the tribal ancestry that we all possess, whether you come from the West or the East or, the North Hemisphere or the Southern Hemisphere, the human being has been diverse through his history, different civilizations, different tribes, and that's a beautiful thing about the human being. There's so much diversity, and there's so much beauty in the diversity of humans, just like the animal kingdom and nature. There isn't just one animal or one plant and one type of tree. There's hundreds, millions of different species which all celebrate the divine. So the human being has also got that potential as almost as a gatekeeper to this realm. The speaking, the talking, the intellectual animal, the animal with the spiritual kind of consciousness and awareness, has all these primal animal kind of baseline, but also has this other potential to be incredible and build and create art and and have and do something extraordinary outside of just being a lion or a cheetah or a dolphin, and just being able to work within the confines of your nature. The human has the ability to do incredible things, right? So that's all okay if you're tribal and you're just surviving. You're going hunting, you've got enough food for the day or for the week. Now the food is taken care of, there's no bills to pay, there's no one to impress. It's just about having time to celebrate and play and explore and pass on your knowledge and your wisdom to your children, and to perpetuate your lineage and your progeny. So humans were simple. Our blueprint is simple: survive, do enough to survive, and then use the rest of the time to thrive and celebrate being human, and make sure you pass that on to the next set of humans. And this perpetual cycle of growth and exploration, and making sure your children do better than what you did, and they come to recognize more than what you did because you give them enough knowledge and wisdom, and then they go out and explore even more, and they just, after 1,000 years, your lineage has explored incredible ways to be human, right? So we live in a society today where everything is monotonous, everything is simplified, everything is uniform. Everyone is trying to work within a certain type of industry and to work towards a certain type of global narrative. Now you have a load of humans trying to survive and not having any time to thrive because their survival is creating disease. Because the hunter-gatherer, when he's surviving on meat and organic, fresh, natural, living food, preserving food as well, smart people, they were like, all right, we got to make sure we got enough to the summer or the winter, let's preserve, let's ferment. Incredible. They were living food, so whatever they ate, they didn't need much of it because it was creating life force and energy. Whereas now we're spending so much time eating and trying to survive, but all of that is creating a deficit in our life force.
You can feel that if you have a meal of like processed food, you can eat so much of it and it doesn't, like, if you have a McDonald's, you can eat a load of it and you don't feel like it sustains you at all.
It's because there's energy but not information in the food, and this is one of the big problems sort of being.
But is there energy in some of the food? There isn't even energy.
Well, yeah, exactly. But I mean, like the way that the fitness industry looks at the moment is everything's done in terms of macros, fat, protein, and carbs. No one talks in terms of micronutrients, and we need those micronutrients to run our bodily functions and to not just survive but thrive. And like people don't look at it that way, and we're full of a culture now where, like you said, there's Kit Kats and all these bars, and there's energy in those foods, but there's no information. And like you said, those foods take away from your life force as opposed to add into your life force. And I think the food is a perfect example of what's going on in the macro. That's a micro of what's going on in the macro in terms of like the stress. So when you eat food, you've got the potential to either add to your being or take away from your being. And a lot of people are unconsciously taken away from their being every time they're eating. Now, it's the same thing when we talk about what you do in terms of the content you consume. It's not just the food you consume, but you surround yourself with good people. Are you reading good books? Are you listening to stuff that makes you feel good? Are you watching stuff that just takes away from what you've got going on? And I think that's one of the big reasons there's so much dis-ease in today's society, which is leading to disease, is we're living completely unaligned with how we've evolved to live. And like you said, we should be eating locally, seasonally, we should be out in nature, we should be living amongst community, and a lot of societal structures, how they exist today, take us away from that.
That's the root. My role as a practitioner in my clinical practice, when I work with patients, when I coach patients, whenever I'm faced with a new patient or a client, I have to break them down and look at them in a holistic, in a deep complex way. And my journey after I graduated and I got my physiology bachelor's, I was led on to studying nutrition, right? That was like a big eureka moment for me. So I went on to study sports and exercise nutrition and physiology, and and then for me it all began with food, because I always had this huge connection with food anyway. Growing up, food was sacred. My family, we all sat together, we ate. I was engaged, growing up I had this incredible experience with food and observing the man coming from, who'd been fishing at 3 a.m, come into the neighborhood and bring the fresh sardines, you know what I mean, and the old lady from up top coming here to do her regular shop. That interaction, the fresh tomatoes, the scent, the aromatherapy of it. There's therapy in, you see, we live in a new world where everybody is seeking and they're desperate for health and therapies and healing. And that's because the world we live in today is functionally a world which has disconnected us from our innate nature, our humanity. That our senses are being deprived. So there is no sensual, spiritual, intellectual imagination. Everything is just uniform, and we've become enslaved and zombified. And this isn't like something kind of absurd to say. You can study this in a scientific level. There is no life force in people. They just wake up and they're just like robots.
Total monotony.
Complete. Now, if you look at the way the ancients lived, everything around them was therapeutic. The way they ate, the way the food, not just the food they ate, where they ate, how they ate, who they were eating with.
Yeah.
Like you said, the energy of that food. And something that I'm fascinated massively with, and have been for a very long time now, as I refined my approach from food to gut health, and how that, as I began to heal all of the issues that manifested in my physical body and my spiritual body, that's how I learned medicine, because now I had to reverse all the ailments and the disease in my body. And if I wasn't able to do that for myself and reinvent myself, naturally, there was no way I could claim, or my ego could sit on a desk with a load of certificates on my wall and say, hey, I am a physician, I'm going to make you better. For me, it just didn't make sense.
But I've said that so many times. I'm like, you can go into see a GP who's like 10 stone overweight, and he's like he's telling you to follow his instructions. It's like, well, why can't you do it for yourself? It's like, it seems so basic. But if you say it to people nowadays, that it's like, they literally say what you're saying is stupid. And but to me, it seems so apparent.
Yeah, it's so obvious,
so clear.
right? And
eating medicine, man.
I think, and that's the problem is when you see doctors, often they're trained in medicine. They're not trained in nutrition. They're not trained in holistic health practices. They don't understand about, they probably, a lot of them will say, oh, sleep's important, but they don't understand sleep. They don't understand, certain breath work practices or meditation practices or contemplation you can do to help improve sleep and stuff like this. It's all about, or a lot of it is about, what's the problem and what pill can we give you to fix that problem. Don't look at the root cause.
For sure. My role today, as a practitioner, and I like to say I'm a practitioner because I'm solving things and I'm being pragmatic in my approach to helping human beings, based on the human experience I've had, the academic, knowledge that I've developed, and the knowledge that I continue to, and wisdom I continue to seek, as I grow, because I know the more I know, the more I don't know. You know what I mean? And there's a concept in Arabic. We say sami'na wa ata'na. We hear, we obey. So my life from a very young age, I kind of molded into this yes sir, no, like yes sir, mentality with my parents. Even though that's kind of, you could say that's a negative thing, saying yes is really bad because it leads to suppression of the true wants and needs. However, what I've developed in my spiritual side is, every time I learn something that I know is good and important and beneficial, whether there's research or not, I'm going to adopt it and implement it today, right now.
Yep.
My ego is not going to get in the way to try and get me to rationalize and intellectualize it. No, the knowledge is sound, the intention is sound, and the person it's coming from is sound. I don't really read. I haven't really. My education hasn't come from books or literature. It's come from people.
I love using. I'll say that to people, like, why don't you tap in and experience? Feel into your own experience and use that to guide you. And I love using Dorian Yates as an example of that, the bodybuilder, because he was 20 years ahead of his time, and he was winning all the Mr. Olympias. And that one of the reasons, and you know, he talks about this on plenty of the podcast, is he looked at what they were saying to do in the magazines, the bodybuilding magazines and books, and then he tried it, and he experimented and tried other stuff, and the other stuff worked better. So he thought, right, okay, my experiences this work better,
Yeah, we'll do it.
and he ran with it, and then he started winning competitions. And it wasn't until 20 years later that they started changing the magazines.
Of course.
Now, if he would have gone, oh, actually, you know, maybe, and doubted his own experience and gone, actually, no, this is what the book says, and done what the book says, he probably wouldn't have achieved what he achieved.
Yeah.
But he completely rewrote it, didn't he? Because he, at times when he was training, there was like real high volume bodybuilding, wasn't it? Like 4 sets of 10, and they were in the gym. Well, Arnold Schwarzenegger was in the gym for 4 hours a day at times and that kind of thing. And he said that he was like a third of the amount of time he was in the gym.
Yeah.
Was it high intensity training? It's called, isn't it? It's just like one set. It was completely revolutionary at the time.
Yeah, exactly. And I think what he highlighted, and Arnie's a really good person to bring up because it gives another example, is as human beings we're unique, right? And Paul Chek says this, we're as different on the inside as we are on the outside. What works for one person might not work for another person. Now, Arnie was an incredibly successful bodybuilder, and you know, he wrote the books that Dorian Yates ignored for himself and went and did his own thing. Now, they were both really successful using two different methodologies, and probably if they were to exchange methodologies, they wouldn't have been so successful. So it's important to, like, obviously look at the data, look at the research, see what other people who are successful are doing, and then try that for yourself and be willing to experiment and tweak stuff and then change, and not be dogmatic about what you're doing just because this or that textbook says that's the way you should be doing it. You know, I think people, we need to look at our personal learned experience. And another great example of this is I always talk about going to sea swimming and like the idea of grounding and stuff like that. Nothing makes me feel better than when I finished a day at work and I've been in front of the laptop all day and I got a headache. I'm like, right, I drive down to sea, I jump into the sea. It completely clears me. Now, I don't know what's going on there, you know, biologically, physiologically. I don't know what's going on. I couldn't explain it to you. But I know my experience is that really helps me refresh, wash the day off, and then relax in the evening. Now, you talk, you know, people, you know, throw around the concept of grounding and stuff like this, and some people will tell you it's woo-woo. All I know is it works for me. Because it works for me, I'll continue doing it.
You don't need a peer-reviewed...
Yeah, exactly. I don't need a double-blind, you know, controlled study to say it works. I just know for myself it works.
It takes a lot of courage to do what Dorian did, and you know, it comes back to human virtues. As we all explore our purpose in life, you know, which should be the purpose. The purpose of life is to figure out the purpose of life, and you know, all the experiences we have should lead us back to. Purpose. Nothing ever goes in the universe of the creator. Nothing is random. So if you live as if everything that's happened to you is random, you might not get anywhere. But if you start to connect the dots, you know, then you might have kind of a path which you may not be conscious or aware of being kind of, you know, opened for you just to step into if you took a time out to just stop, breathe, reflect, and have the courage. You know, so what Dorian did was have the courage to say, you know what, nah. And I think a lot of successful people in life, whatever success means, you know, these successful people that travel the world educating and you know, inspiring people to change, you know, ultimately it doesn't matter how many books you read, how many people you study and observe and listen to, it comes back down to the self and the willingness to sacrifice. And to have the courage to say, you know what, I'm not going to do this, I'm going to go this way. And in that, there are so many lessons and kind of changes in your being that happen in that split second when you just have the courage to break a habit or a pattern or a thought process or a friendship or all these things which we're attached to as humans, materialistically. And definitely one of the things in my life which I've kind of noticed, obviously, more recently, that has been a pattern is my constant willingness to change and sacrifice, and people thought I was crazy because I was never settling. I was always doing this, I was doing that, I was everywhere and constantly changing my mind. And to the average person, I was ridiculous because there was no security or safety in my approach. But to the person I'm trying to be, it makes complete sense because I'm trying to get somewhere as a spirit, and I don't know where it is, and I have an idea of what I think that may be. Until I do that and experience something, is going to lead me to stay or change, and I'm not afraid to say to change or to stop and sacrifice. So I'm here today because I've made so many sacrifices. People won't even start to imagine how many sacrifices I've made to get here. And it's within those sacrifices and the education of, you know, the exploration of myself and my capacity and my will and my spirit through making really difficult changes and decisions in my life is where I've learned the most about my potential as a human being, how simple life is, and how successful people can be when they start being attached to stuff and ideas and thoughts and jobs and friends and parents. You know, and this is in our tradition and our concept and our faith is there should only be complete attachment to the Creator and to the divine and nothing else. Everything outside of the Creator, you know, whether it's your family, whether it's your car, whether it's your house, whether it's your job, whether it's your resume, attaching yourself to that is only going to bring you distress and disability and imbalance and unfulfilled life, because you're always outsourcing your life force and your commitment and your energy to that thing or that person, and that attachment can come to your demise. However, when you have complete attachment to the Creator, and to this kind of, you know, this being, this higher being, and everything revolves around connecting and being aware of this higher being, everything you do through this human journey will always reconnect you back to that in remembrance and in gratitude and in praise. Then you realize, okay, all of this stuff doesn't really matter, because the purpose is I'm here, I come from this source and I return to this source, and everything else in between is just a distraction. So with that, you learn that health, and this is where my life is right now, my practice is not so much on the diet plans and nutrition plans and the workout programs, but more about simplifying one's approach to living. Yeah. Because that's where the medicine lies.
It's really interesting what you've just said there. I think it's so disconnected from where we are generally with Western culture.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of people will identify with, you know, their name, where they live, what they own, blah blah blah.
Yeah.
And I suppose if you got a client to come in off the street who was, you said to them, okay, who are you? And they say, oh, my name, this is my age, this is my job, this is my salary. What would be a first step you may say to someone? Okay, right, actually, we're going to try and disconnect you from this viewpoint, and we're going to try and bring things back into a more simple place. Where would you start with someone like that?
You know, every consultation that I take and every patient that I work with, my approach is completely different. And it's like from a business perspective, it's really frustrating because, you know, to scale this fluid and flexible approach is a nightmare.
You not got any cookie cutter plans?
No. Right?
So, don't need a template, mate. I'm afraid, like
listen,
step by step.
But you know, you used the word archetype earlier. Archetype is a very, very important reality for me. Simplify every single human being into their most fundamental archetypal foundations. So first, if you don't know who you are, let's have a dialogue and a conversation for the next couple of hours, and at the end of that, let me ask you that question again and see who you are. But I'm going to help you because you're here to seek my expertise. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to, you know, play dumb and try and get you to figure it out because you're here to pay me to help you figure it out. So I'm going to help you figure it out. Okay. Correct me if I'm wrong. And I'm always open. I'm here to speak and dialogue, but I'm going to speak and tell you and guide you. And if you disagree, we stop and we can kind of rebuttal.
Yeah.
So we can understand, you know, and I'm just here. You're paying me for my time and my services because I've invested more than my 10,000 hours to get to a level of wisdom which allows me to consult you and get to figure you out and help you figure you out in a really short period of time. I'm not here to try and milk you and make money out of you. I'm actually here to help you. So first of all, I understand you as a human being. I break you down as physical and spiritual. You're a body and you're a soul. Would you agree or would you disagree? Most people I work with, they say, yes, I agree. I am partly spiritual, partly physical. Those that don't agree, then we move on and say, all right, let me explain to you why I believe this is the case.
So just you don't split into physical, spiritual, mental, or
the mental falls into the physical. So I go first. It's really simple. The man is juxtaposed between body and soul. Now the body, I break the body down into biopsychosocial, right? So the biology, the physiology, the cells, and this is all interconnected, by the way, right? It's not like separate systems. We can't disconnect them. They work in accordance with each other, and they require each other to work. They can't be differentiated. So when I say biological, psychological, and social, it means that's you, and I'm just trying to simplify it so you can get some sort of simplification of it. But the biology is the blood, it's the lymph, it's the gut cells, it's the nerve endings, it's the fascia, it's the soft tissue, right? It's the tendons, it's the ligaments, it's your skin, it's the physical, right? Then we look at the psychological. So that's with the psychological, it's also emotional too, right? So the mind, the mindset, your beliefs, your dogmas, your identity, your traumas, your conditioned self, how you see yourself mentally, the ideas that go in your head, the depression you may be suffering from, or the anxiety, which we kind of tag as psychological ailments. And for me, I believe these are spiritual ailments, but we'll talk about that another time. And then the sociology, let's not forget that you as in a human being, you don't exist in just within yourself. And you're not contained within yourself. You're not in a bubble or a vacuum. You exist within a community. There is an environmental part of you. So there is a tribe, there is a family, there is a partnership or a life partner you have. There is a community. So I cannot distinguish you outside of your environment. So I have to consider you as just an individual, not just as individual, but as individual as part of an environment. So that's the biopsychosocial, and then we look at the spiritual, which is the soul. And I always go in my work. I spend more time kind of educating the concept of the spirit and the soul, because that energy and that life force of the soul, if that's sound, the electrical circuitry of that spirit has a direct influence on the biopsychosocial. If the soul is not intact and you're not living consciously, searching for your purpose of the spirit and what kind of making sense of what all of this is about, then you're going to have issues in the biopsychosocial, because you're going to fall out of place. So instead of me correcting people's diet or their mindset or their traumas or their relationships or their divorce or whatever, their jobs, I actually go straight into the spiritual and try and create an understanding and form of a spiritual philosophy with my patients, whether they're religious or non-religious. If they're Muslim, we solidify their aqidah, we solidify the understanding of what it truly means to be a spirit within that confine. If they're Christian, or if they're Hindu, or if they're atheistic, I create a discourse for a spiritual reality to the self. Now, when you create that understanding, and most of the people that I get, everyone I work with I've never had the issue with that. They recognize that. Some of them are actually happy to hear it, because it makes sense. Why wouldn't it, if it's ingrained within you to know, like everything is about remembrance. Whenever we come to information, it's not like we know it. It's within our spirit and our spiritual consciousness to know truth. Whenever we come across information, it's not nothing new. It's something we already know, and the fact that we remember gives us peace, because it's one piece of the puzzle that we filling, right? So for me, my work now works fundamentally on developing people's spiritual philosophy, because without that circuitry, that spiritual biome, we cannot heal the biopsychosocial. Because I'm going to be efficient. I want to go to the root cause. I want to go to purpose. When there is an understanding or a calibration of purpose and a direction, I believe that begins in the spirit. And I don't, I work, you can call it energy healing, but really I just teach people that they need to take spiritual stuff serious.
It's really interesting you say that, because so I've studied under Paul Chek, and when you do his level 1, his first thing he gets you to do is outline your dream.
Cool.
And his point is the whole purpose behind it is, if you've got a dream, you don't need a nightmare. And when you were saying that about creating this, what you call the soul as a kind of the foundation for everything else, it's the same thing. It's just drawing that purpose out from someone. Why does someone think they're here on the earth? And it's such a strange concept, because until, I don't know how many, 5 years ago now, I'd never come across anything like that. That is not touched on in school.
But how liberating was that when you did?
Well, it just like what you said, it feels right. It feels like it's a remembered piece of information that you've been just waiting to stumble across all your life, and then from that, a true identity starts to form, and you can have purpose and direction in your life, which I don't think I had until that point.
Yeah. You find yourself immersed in, you're like, all right, I'm 25 and I'm here, I work for this company, I've got a nice paycheck, all right, cool, I've got a flat, I've got a girlfriend, I've got some nice shoes, I fit in. It's like, but what the fuck is the point in all this? And then, it's like, for what?
Yeah.
Then when you have this, people have a spiritual awakening, but no, it's just returning back to source and kind of, brushing off all of the shit that doesn't really matter and the mask and the makeup and looking what really is there.
Mm-hmm.
And what really is there is the soul, is the spirit, which is yearning for to be understood, to be awakened, to be recognized, to be lit. Because, just as we have physiological food to nourish ourselves with carbohydrates and protein and energy and micronutrients, the soul also has a nutritional regime it needs to fulfill. It needs to eat.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Now that spiritual food has been described in multiple different traditions in many different ways. As a Muslim, I stop 5 times a day. I adopt postures of gratitude, movement patterns of gratitude, and then also verbal in kind of communications and speech, which is full of gratitude. And this rests my adrenal glands. 5 times a day, I have a routine where I adopt postures of gratitude. I tell my body it's okay, it's safe. There's nothing to worry about. We have food. There's no stress. There's no animals. Everything's cool, and I do that 5 times a day.
Mm-hmm.
And I do that because it comes through the lineage and the chain of transmission through my teachers and our spiritual kind of teachers. Now, some traditions they'll give you meditation. But in all traditions, whether you go to China or Tibet or to India or to South America or to Africa, there are archetypal foundational activities the human body knows to be nourishing and satisfying and fulfilling. That's breathing correctly, that's grounding on the floor, that's gratitude, that's connecting to a highest purpose and a higher source. That's forgiveness, that's love, it's sharing, there's compassion, there's giving, there's helping, there's community. So these are all, all these traditions have got a lot in common. They might say it in different ways and they might interpret it in different ways, but they all reside in the same truth, which is the human body and the human soul need to be fed and nourished with a certain type of nutrient.
Mm-hmm.
If you focus predominantly on the physical self and you miss the spiritual self, which the health industry, the fitness industry does, it's mostly aesthetic, it's mostly physical, it's run faster, climb higher, cut more body fat, lift more weight. There's no substance or spirituality into that. Now you bring a Paul Chek into the equation. I don't know his stuff, I don't know his work, I don't know his philosophy, but I'm aware of it and I've seen some of his stuff and I've read some of his posts. He's great. He's lifting weights, he's running, he's climbing, but he's doing it with awareness. He's doing it with purpose. He's doing it with a spiritual intention. Now that transforms his being. Now he becomes a completely different human being with a completely different potential. And the ability to translate that into other human beings now becomes propagated.
Yeah.
Because it's more than just, hey, look at me, I look great, I run faster. Who gives a fuck?
Yeah.
When there's a spiritual intention, he goes, I want to do this because I want to be here to serve you. I want to help you serve your grandma.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't do that without nourishing the spirit. Chanting again, one of the things I find fascinating is looking at the anatomy of the human being. Again, it couldn't have evolved from a single cell organism. It couldn't have. It is, the machinery is incredible. This design is immaculate. It's perfect. You look at the Fibonacci sequence. You look at history. You look at what we can do with the mind. But the human the being, right? Let's look at. For me, one of the systems that I'm very much fascinated with is the human microbiome, and then the HPA axis, so the immune system, right? Which is hypothalamus, adrenal, hypothalamus, pituitary gland, adrenal glands, and then to the center of that you've got the vagus nerve, and the kind of the immune system, the innate immune system, and then the external immune system of the environment. Now, life is about feeling. It's about sensation. When you're alive, you're feeling. When you're depressed and anxious and suicidal, there's no feeling. You don't feel. And the key to feeling and sensation is the breath, right? So the key to life is breath. You cut someone's oxygen supply, they're dead within a few minutes, right? So breath is key to life. Mm-hmm. Most people have gone 20, 30 years not knowing how to breathe properly. They're survival breathing. They're not optimal breathing. So now when you breathe, you've got these incredible kind of, these paranasal sinuses, right, which secrete nitric oxide. And when you breathe through the nose, you secrete nitric oxide and you stimulate, ventilation through the nose. This increases salivation in the mouth. This increases oxygen in the blood into the lungs. That calms the stress response. It gets more oxygen into the tissues. It gets more oxygen into the brain. It tells your immune glands that everything is okay. Everything's is fine. And that's just in breathing. You learn how to breathe, you can literally optimize your immune function, your focus, your cognition, your life expectancy, your sex drive, all in knowing how to breathe. Mm-hmm. Now, if you're not doing that consciously, if no one teaches you how to do it, if you don't understand the innate mechanisms that are complex yet intertwined with all that system, for me, that is the proof of concept, the proof there's a creator who went into so much thought into connecting all of these different kind of organ systems and endocrine functions and vascular kind of neural kind of systems in the body, just to get you to have a better experience of what it means to be human. Mm-hmm. Just one breath can change your life.
I think on that point, it's like we innately know how to breathe as well, because when you see babies are born, they're belly breathing, but as we grow older as adults, our lives become more stressful, we start going into sympathetic state more often. You see that people start to chest breathe, take really short shallow breaths, and that's like a negative feedback cycle, right? Because that you're breathing that way because you're in a sympathetic state, but because you're then breathing that way, it's telling your body you're constantly in a sympathetic state.
Perpetuate that,
And back to your point earlier, Harry, that proliferates this idea of constantly being in an acute stress situation, and we're living our lives, or a lot of people living their lives in these acute stress states where we're not used to doing that. Like evolutionary, we're used to having more these moments of stress, where maybe we're fighting or we're hunting or we're being hunted, and then that experience is over and it dissipates. Whereas now in modern society, we're constantly in this stress state. And just by learning how to breathe properly, you can knock yourself from a sympathetic into a parasympathetic rest and digest state.
You trust. The war is on the mind. The war is on the soul. The intellect, for me, it always goes back to the soul and the spirit. There is a spiritual intellect which overrides the psychological intellect. The psychological intellect is there to intellectualize and to rationalize what the spirit can feel and understand. Whether you know that or not, the spirit knows, it feels, it has a compass. But when you rationalize it and intellectualize it, it gives you more clarity and certainty in what you're feeding your soul. So for me, the environment we live in today, how can you be healthy when everything around you is pushing you and motivating you to do more when you don't need to do more? It's motivating you to buy more, to own more, to consume more, to go here, to go there, to prepare for, a problem that might arise, to prepare for, the next disaster. Or there's always the whole global narrative, the whole human narrative is focusing on all the pain and the trauma of the global human consciousness. Nobody is tapping into, on a global scale, into the beauty, into the art, and if you're plugged into the matrix, it's very easy for you to be diseased, because you go into work, you come back, everyone's talking about what is on the TV. You come home, you watch that's solidified, that reality solidified. You go on your phone, that reality solidified, and then you speak to your children and they're coming from school, that reality solidified. So you live in this bubble. All you have to do is stop, take a breath, shut the TV, get out of the house, say no to that extra shift, go and take a walk in the forest. Now, all of a sudden, there is a potential there. It's not like people think, get into nature, there's a healing. No. The perception of nature is important. You can still be at work whilst you're walking in nature. You can still be in that fear, fight or flight mindset if you don't consciously calibrate yourself to being in a more natural environment, man-made environments, and then kind of, God or divine-made environments. We feel better when we're in nature because there is a not just a physical but a spiritual DNA within creation that we are part of. That is part of us. Now, when we surround ourselves in this man-made artificial environment with artificial frequencies, artificial light, artificial people, artificial food, of course the immune system goes, fuck, what's going on here? Disease, 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 because it does not recognize this language. Mm-hmm. So as humans, we're all, whether we come from North Africa, South America, or India, we have what I call a spiritual kind of immunity. We have a spiritual DNA. We have a physiological DNA. It's ingrained within us. We have this kind of gene pool of everything which is in creation. Everything that, because if you think about it, we come from, you got a MacBook, right? And then somebody, Mac or Apple designed that MacBook. Now, just before here, you put a PC hard drive into that MacBook. The MacBook goes, whoa, this isn't part of us. We don't know how to understand this information. It will not accept it. It will reject it. Now, when you put human beings, which are designed to live in God's kingdom, in a divinely designed environment with natural spring water, natural soil, natural woods, smelling natural, plant extracts and essential oils, feeling all of this stuff, where the sensual experience of the physical stuff is perpetuated by being around all this diversity. And then you add to that more spirituality to that. Even you got spiritual diversity on top of a physical diversity. It's quite cool to be human now, all right? But when you put a human being in a artificially designed environment, being mind programmed day in, day out to think a certain way, eat a certain way, being pressured by influencers who are fake, who themselves are diseased, but perpetuate this sense of fulfillment through their material stuff, their trainers or their houses or their cars or their girlfriends or whatever, their jobs, right? And you look at that and you're programmed for that. Now that the compass is, all right, if I don't have that, I'm not happy, right? But the health industry, I don't even want to talk about the mainstream medical allopathic narrative. That's clear and evident what the kind of the consensus is with that. I'm looking at the alternative health conscious kind of alternative model of care, where so many people are getting it wrong because they're still tapping into that same consumer mindset. You got to buy this, you got to buy that, you got to go on this program, you got to do that, you got to do this, you got to take this retreat. And it's like, whoa, I'm still consuming. I'm still in fight or flight in health industry, which is making just as much money as the pharmaceutical industry. So my practices, the ones that I endorse and the ones that I kind of attach onto from our tradition, is the minimizing, simplifying, and bringing everything down into baseline where you can be happy with not much.
Yeah.
You don't need much. It's quality over quantity, right? And fundamentally, you look at spiritual practices, you look at gratitude practices, you look at community practices, you look at connecting to a higher purpose, you look at eating little but diverse food, just like the ancestors did.